Hello, everyone. Welcome to Be Heard. I'm Mark Stern, pastor of adult ministries at Faith Bible Church. And today we're going to be talking about sharing my faith, or sharing your faith. So our guests today are Luke McMeans and Derek Bailey. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So we're just going to jump right in there. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. So question number one, Luke. I'll start with Luke. How often do you share your faith, and what does that look like?
So typically when I have a conversation with a lost person about God, it doesn't come up in the context of me saying, hey, I want to tell you about the gospel. Usually, I'll be like when I'm sitting on a plane going to teach somewhere walk through the Bible, or when I'm out at a restaurant, I'll have an opportunity to have a conversation with someone, and I'll just start talking about how I'm in Bible school, or I'll start talking about stuff that I do with my friends at church, or things that I see God doing in my life. So it comes up in kind of more of a broad general sense that allows me to identify with God in some way. And then depending on how they respond to that, if they respond with openness and they want to hear more about that, right, or if they shut me down, I know whether or not, this is fertile soil that God has already prepared that I can share. So as I keep talking about God and kind of get a feel for where they're at and what work God might already be doing in their hearts, that allows me to go deeper. Do you attend a church somewhere? Do you, identify with a specific religion? What do you think about Jesus and the Bible? And I will just kind of take that conversation as far and as deep as they allow it to go. So I try to have those conversations as often as I'm in a place long enough with one person that it's appropriate.
Is it intentional? Are you looking to do this?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always looking to share with people that I identify with Jesus, whether it's at my job or, at my school. I go to a Bible college, and part of being accepted is that you have to sign a statement of faith and give your testimony. So there's not really a whole lot of lost students I interact with at school. But yeah, anytime I have an interaction with somebody, I always try to put my faith first, so that immediately they identify me with God. Right. And then again, just seeing how they respond to that lets me know if I can keep pursuing that path deeper. But my hope is always that I can ask them whether or not they identify with Jesus, right, after I share that I do.
What about you, Derek?
Well, I'll say I do a combination of what Luke does, but just on a daily basis, just try to live it out, right, by making just good decisions, making good decisions on what I see, right, things that I hear, and just how I'm living out in just front of people. Right. I just try to be an example, because the Bible does say, let your light so shine before men, right, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who's in heaven. So, there's some practical things you can do, but, just for me, just living it out, right, so people can see, okay, he's doing this, and this. They can see, okay, without me even having to say anything, right, they can say, oh, he's a Christian. Because, I teach juveniles, and, they want to always come to class. They want to hear some, the clean version of some music. And I'm like, no, I'm not playing it, Because even though they say it's clean, they might take the curse words out of it, but it's still the content. Right. They may be talking about, some just vulgar. So just from that, they say, oh, he's not going to play that because he's a Christian. I never even told him I was a Christian. Right. So, just trying to just, let my light shine and just being an example of, the word.
So you're living with an awareness that people are watching me.
Yeah, all the time.
And so because of that, you make sure you live your,
yeah.
You naturally do it because you're a Christian, but you're always aware that somebody's watching.
Always aware, yeah.
So what are some personal, I'll direct this to Derek, we'll start with you. What are some personal and cultural roadblocks to sharing your faith?
I would say personal, just really just having that discernment, just knowing when to say this or when not to say it. Sometimes, I let my own carnal mind get in the way instead of just being led by the Spirit. That's what we call it do, but sometimes I let that come into play. So, it's just personal, just knowing when and when not, and what to say sometimes, what not to say. Sometimes I just let my own carnal mind just block that. Right. And then just culturally, I really don't interact with too many other races or other cultures, I should say. But if I did have a cultural just something that's stopping me. Maybe be language. I don't speak Spanish or I speak English. So I would say just maybe just the language aspect of it.
And even like culturally, we're looked at, Christians in general looked at like we're judgmental of people. And so, especially in this sensitive culture that we live in today, culturally, it can be a hindrance to share your faith because it's like you don't want to come off a certain way. You don't want to come off as judgmental or whatever. Yeah. So, like, I mean, how do y'all deal with that aspect of it?
Man, I think, speaking of like a personal roadblock, I am aware that I can tend to be the kind of person that speaks before they listen. And so sometimes I don't take the time to really sit down with someone and find out where they're at so that I can tailor my telling of the gospel to the questions they're already asking about life. That's what sharing the gospel is all about. It's saying, hey, I know the questions you're asking about who you are and about your relationships and about where you came from, and the story that I have to tell will answer those questions better than any other story you could ever hear. But if I don't know what questions they're asking, then I'm going to be a bad vessel for God's answers, right? So, I try and I pray and ask God to help me have the humility to be available to people's needs, so that when I sit down and God gives me the opportunity to share, I can find out what God's already cultivating in their life, what questions they're already asking, so that as far into the gospel as I'm able to get with this person, as far as God allows me to go, I walk that trail well, and I walk it intentionally for that person, and what it is that they need to hear. But it's hard to do that, and I think like another cultural barrier is that we live in a appointment-driven culture. Right. It's like, besides just the fear of not wanting to like upset a relationship or offend somebody, it's also just hard to find a time where you can sit down and have a conversation. Like, if I'm walking through the grocery store, somebody's not looking to get into a 20-minute discussion about the gospel. Right. Or if I'm standing on a street corner or walking through a mall, it's hard to find people who they're sitting in such a way that you feel like you could approach them and not interrupt them. So that's like my biggest fear is, or what Satan uses to give me fear when I'm trying to share the gospel, is just that I'm going to be an interruption to something somebody's got going on.
I like what you said earlier about, the gospel, it actually meets a need in that person's life, whether it's spiritual, mental, even physical to some degree. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have to bring a sensitivity to what does this person need, which speaks to you talked about discernment. Mm-hmm. That's why we need the Holy Spirit to lead us, because you're like, I don't know how to, like, I have to tailor to some degree a message for this person because they have specific needs. And so it takes some listening to, hey, what is this person really needing in this moment? Mm-hmm. I mean, the gospel is the gospel, but how you present it, it makes a big difference on how they receive it.
Right.
I agree.
So next question, what is more effective? Verbally sharing the gospel or just living it out? Because people will make that distinction sometimes. Hey, I don't want to offend people, so I don't talk about Jesus at work. I just live it out. Is there a difference there? Does that really matter? When you can take the question.
I think they're both effective. Because we have the Bible because people were verbal. It was God-inspired words. So we wouldn't have the Bible if it wasn't verbal. So, but also those same people, they were not just only verbal; they were also doers. You could see them, walking it out. So if like when Peter he encountered the blind beggar, he asked him, hey, for some money, but Peter's like, silver and gold have I none, but what do I have? I give it to you. Right. So hey, he had the power to lay hands on him and heal him. So he I guess you say we communicate the gospel verbally, but also it has to be backed up, because I think that's one of the things that's when we did talk about culture that we get dinged on a lot. We get dinged on as being hypocrites. Right. We talk a lot of stuff, but we're not really backing it up. Right. So I think that's part of the issue with us.
Yeah. Well, I think you can share the gospel without living the gospel. Right. Like James says, if you see somebody with a need and you say be warmed and fed and don't help them out, your words are worthless. Right. Paul says if you have the gift of prophecy and you speak in utterances from God and yet you have not love, your words might as well have not have been spoken. Right. Probably going to do more harm than good. I don't think you can live the gospel without sharing the gospel. There's a phrase by St. Francis of Assisi that has permeated our church culture that says, share the gospel wherever possible, and if necessary, use words. I think that is like the enemy of evangelism, that phrase, because there are plenty of people who can do nice things for other people and not be affiliated with Jesus. There are plenty of people who can throw money at a problem or further some humanitarian effort and be nice, be an approachable, open person, and yet do nothing to impact people eternally. That kind of working is just as empty as saying words and not giving love with it. Right. If you are identifying with Jesus, if you're living out the gospel, then Jesus is going to be on your lips. Right. Your speech is going to be surrendered to his identity in you as much as your actions are going to be, because you're his slave. He tells you how to spend yourself. And so, if I want to be an effective advancer of the kingdom, then not only am I going to be identifying with godly principles, not only am I going to be bathing my mind in the word so that I can give righteous counsel to people and be an influence of peace and restoration, but I'm going to constantly be inserting what I love, which is the person of Jesus, into the conversations I have with other people. In the same way that I insert my family or my friends or my favorite hobbies into conversations, what I love is on my lips. And, it's just like what Paul says, if people never hear the preaching of the word, if people don't have a preacher sent to them, how will they hear? Right. The actions without the explicit statements that Jesus is Lord and the explicit call for people to submit to him are worthless. You're just sending people to hell more comfortably. Those some nice memories.
You make a good point. If I look at your life and you're a good person, there's a lot of good people in the world. I need you to interpret what I'm saying. So I think that's what the gospel does. It's interpreting what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
You're not just looking at a good person. You're looking at a transformed, changed person from the inside out. So I think we need both, as you guys have mentioned. Okay, so last question. So when you're dealing with a non-believer, non-Christian, how do you share the gospel with them? Like, do you build relationships with them? Is it just a matter of handing out a tract? How do you do this? Like, if I'm a person, I want to share the gospel with people at my job. How do I do this? Yeah. Like, make it practical for us.
I think so there's the ideal situation, and then there's the situations that we tend to experience. So in a perfect world, evangelism would always be preceded by relationship, and it would always be proceeded by discipleship. So it would begin with establishing trust with a person, demonstrating that you care, then planting the seeds of the gospel, and then after you've planted those seeds, and if God brings fruit, then you would disciple them, and get them plugged in with not the place of the church, but the body of the church to help nourish their faith. Unfortunately, there's some times where God is going to call you. I say unfortunately. Fortunately, you don't always have the chance to do both of those things. Fortunately, even when those opportunities aren't present, God still calls you to share the gospel. So, sometimes you're going to be sitting next to somebody, again, like on an airplane, and you feel like, hey, this is a chance to strike up a conversation. I don't have any prior relationship with that person. Right. So I have to try to show them I care in just a few words, and then at the first opportunity I get, start to cultivate that conversation. Right. If that's from God, and if God wants to reap fruit, that conversation will go well, even in the limited interaction that I have to work off of. Right. And if it doesn't, then that's all right. That's not my responsibility. I'll just know that I've shared what I could. But I think the important thing is just ministering to the people around you, the people that you see recurringly that you do have existing relationships with, right, so that you can disciple them after those seeds are planted. Discipleship's a part of evangelism. So, yep. And those are the scariest things to do, because that's where there's a relationship at stake, right? This is a person, if they get mad at me for this, I'm going to have to see them tomorrow. Yep. But I think those existing relationships are where the most fruit can be reaped.
Derek?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily believe you have to build a relationship, because when I read Acts chapter 2, during the Feast of Pentecost, they were speaking in tongues, and, the people on the outside were like, what's going on, we're hearing, these people speak our language, and they're only Galatians. But, Peter, he started to share, but he was just preaching. He didn't have, a prior relationship with him. The scripture said he was just preaching. He kept preaching to him. And then after, just so long of preaching, they were like, what must we do? And then so Peter, he continued to preach. then the Bible says, what was it, 3,000 were added to the church. So he didn't have a specific relationship with them.
Right.
He just preached the word.
Yep.
But I noticed also in Acts chapter 2 verses 42 through 47, after those people were saved and they were baptized, then it talks about them breaking bread and having fellowship, and just continue with the apostles' teachings and so on.
Right.
So I mean, I don't think you have to always build a relationship,
right.
but there, like you said, there can be opportunities where you will.
Yep.
And that you can. So
I agree. Well, guys, we're out of time. I appreciate your time and
thank you.
welcome to Be Heard.
All right.